If you ask me, the most dangerous moment in a king's life is not when he is surrounded by enemies, but when he looks around and sees absolutely no one left to fight. We are currently watching Sonny stand at the pinnacle of a mountain he has been climbing for decades. For the first time in what feels like an eternity, the traditional mafia families that once ruled the streets are nothing more than ghosts. The latest threat, Jens, has been completely neutralized and is currently sitting behind bars where he belongs. The scheming double agent Ross is completely out of the picture and no longer a threat to anyone. By all conventional metrics, Sonny has won the ultimate victory. He has secured his territory, vanquished his rivals, and created a protective bubble around his entire empire. Most viewers are probably breathing a massive sigh of relief, thinking that our beloved boss can finally kick back, pour a glass of expensive whiskey, and enjoy the peace he has fought so brutally to achieve. But I have a completely different read on this situation. I think this supposed era of tranquility is actually the most terrifying red flag the writers could possibly wave in our faces. Let us take a quick look at the current landscape to understand why this piece feels so unnatural. Jens is locked away, paying the heavy price for his relentless and ruthless ambition. The immediate threats that kept everyone on high alert have evaporated into thin air. Sonny is essentially operating without any significant pushback from rival factions. The streets are quiet, the docks are operating smoothly under his watch, and his inner circle is finally able to breathe. It is a golden age for his organization, a time of unprecedented stability and calm. But this is exactly where it gets interesting. We know exactly how this universe operates. A peaceful town does not make for compelling television, and a mob boss without a war is a character without a purpose. If the criminal underworld is entirely pacified, a massive chunk of the show's inherent tension just vanishes. The writers are absolutely not going to let the central pillar of their dramatic conflict simply retire into a quiet life of luxury. This brings me to a fundamental rule of power dynamics, both in the real world and in the fictional realm we invest so much of our time in. Nature absolutely abhors a vacuum. When you completely eradicate the old guard and eliminate every visible enemy, you do not get lasting peace. You get a blank canvas for something entirely new and infinitely more dangerous to take root. For years, the conflicts we have witnessed were largely predictable. It was always one street boss challenging another, trading bullets, making threats in dimly lit warehouses, and fighting over the exact same illicit trade routes. It was a game of chess played with very familiar pieces on a very familiar board. But what happens when that board is completely wiped clean? You do not just get a new opponent playing the same game. You get an entirely new game. And I strongly believe that this new game is about to begin ushering in an era that will make the old turf wars look like absolute child's play. Think back to the various eras of conflict we have seen over the years to truly anchor this point. Every single time our favorite boss thought he had finally outsmarted his rivals and secured his legacy, a new challenger stepped out of the shadows. But those challengers always spoke the exact same language of violence and intimidation. They respected, or at least understood, the established rules of the underworld. They knew how to send a message with a weapon, and they knew how to bleed. Now, however, the landscape is completely barren of those traditional threats. This is the absolute perfect narrative opportunity to introduce a villain who does not play by the old rules. A villain who does not operate from the shadows of a damp warehouse, but from the glaring, sterile lights of a corporate boardroom. We have a massive influx of new faces arriving in town, and this is where my theory really starts to take concrete shape. The show has been heavily promoting a summer of fresh arrivals and returning favorites, setting the stage for a massive shift in dynamic. We have Tristan stepping in as a promising new doctor, already making waves and creating tension in the hospital corridors. We have Scout returning, slightly older and ready to navigate the emotional complexities of her family legacy. We have Harker stepping into the intelligence scene, and the enigmatic Z pulling the strings from the very top of the agency. We even have Serena making a triumphant return to shake things up and bring her unique energy back to the cosmetics world. For almost every single one of these characters, we have been given a very clear roadmap. We know their professions, their connections, and the specific narrative lanes they are meant to occupy. The writers have been incredibly transparent about how these pieces fit into the puzzle. But then there is Hudson. If you ask me, Hudson is the most glaring question mark this show has introduced in years. We know absolutely nothing about him, other than the fact that he is scheduled to arrive at the end of July and is vaguely described as a mysterious business executive. Why the intense, deliberate secrecy? Why provide detailed backgrounds and clear motivations for every other newcomer, but keep Hudson completely shrouded in mystery? In a serialized drama, a lack of information is never an accident. It is a highly calculated choice designed to build anticipation for a massive reveal. I am absolutely convinced that this corporate executive facade is a carefully constructed Trojan horse, designed to slip past everyone's defenses unnoticed. My central thesis is this. Hudson is not just another wealthy businessman looking to invest in local real estate or start a tech company. He is the vanguard of a highly sophisticated, corporatized criminal syndicate. We are moving away from the era of street-level mobsters and entering the terrifying era of the white-collar kingpin. Imagine a threat that does not use guns to take over territory, but uses hostile takeovers, shell companies, and aggressive litigation. This kind of adversary would completely bypass the physical defenses that Sonny has spent decades building. You cannot shoot a corporate merger. You cannot intimidate a board of directors that operates through layers of legal protection and offshore accounts. It is a completely different kind of warfare, one that leaves no fingerprints and sheds no visible blood. Let us anchor this by looking at the recent villains we just said goodbye to. Jens was a very traditional antagonist. He was ruthless, violent, and direct in his methods, relying on fear and physical force. Ross was a manipulator, a double agent who used his official government capacity to mask his dirty deeds and orchestrate chaos. Both of them were incredibly dangerous, but they were dangerous in ways that our seasoned boss could eventually understand, track, and counter. Hudson, on the other hand, represents a complete paradigm shift. If my theory holds true, Hudson will wear bespoke suits, attend high society charity galas, and shake hands with the mayor, all while systematically dismantling the local underworld economy from the inside out. He would be a master of manipulating both the legitimate business world and the criminal enterprise simultaneously, blurring the lines until no one knows who the real enemy is. How would a corporate kingpin actually execute this takeover? It would be an absolute masterclass in slow, agonizing suffocation. Hudson would not announce his arrival with a dramatic shootout at a local restaurant. Instead, he would start quietly buying up legitimate businesses that serve as fronts or logistical hubs for the existing organization. He would purchase the real estate around the docks, effectively controlling the flow of goods without ever touching a shipping container. He would leverage corporate influence to squeeze supply lines, bribe politicians through perfectly legal campaign contributions, and use the law as a weapon to isolate his targets. By the time anyone realizes that this charming, philanthropic new executive is actually a ruthless crime lord, the trap will have already snapped shut, leaving no room for escape. This strategy perfectly exploits the absolute biggest blind spot in the current power structure. Sonny is an undisputed master of street warfare. He knows exactly how to read the loyalty of his men, how to anticipate a physical ambush, and how to command respect through fear and personal charisma. But how does he fight a billionaire who uses hedge funds and corporate lawyers to choke off his resources? It is an entirely different battlefield, requiring a completely different set of weapons. The instincts and skills that kept him alive and on top for all these decades might be completely useless against an enemy who fights with spreadsheets, legal injunctions, and hostile board takeovers. This is exactly why Hudson could be the most lethal antagonist we have ever seen on this canvas. Now, I have to pause and play devil's advocate with my own brain for a moment, because I know how easy it is to get carried away with theories. Am I reading entirely too much into a simple casting announcement? Is it possible that Hudson really is just a regular corporate executive? Maybe he is just being brought in to create some standard boardroom drama, romance one of the leading ladies, and serve as a minor obstacle in a mundane corporate storyline. Perhaps the writers simply have not fleshed out his character yet, and the intense secrecy is just a byproduct of incomplete planning rather than a masterstroke of suspense. It is entirely possible that I am projecting my deep desire for a high-stakes, intellectual mob war onto a character who is destined to do nothing more than argue over profit margins and merger details in the background. But then I look at the timing of everything, and I immediately reject that self-doubt. You do not wipe out the entire criminal opposition, establish a profound and unnatural peace, and then introduce a highly secretive, powerful executive right at the exact moment a massive power vacuum opens up just by pure coincidence. The narrative architecture is far too perfectly aligned for this to be an accident. The writers have deliberately cleared the stage. They have removed Jens and Ross specifically to make room for something much bigger and much more complex. The secrecy surrounding Hudson is a deliberate spotlight, not a shadow. It is a calculated narrative choice to ensure that when he finally drops his corporate mask, the impact will be absolutely seismic and change the fabric of the show forever. If this corporate takeover theory is correct, it brings us to a fascinating and heartbreaking psychological crossroad for our reigning kingpin. For the first time in his entire life, Sonny might actually find himself completely outmatched, not in firepower or manpower, but in strategy, legal maneuvering, and financial resources. This could be the ultimate catalyst that forces him to genuinely consider stepping down and handing over the reins. Not because he is weak, and not because he has lost his edge, but because he might finally realize that the world has evolved past his methods. He might recognize that fighting a modern corporate war requires a different kind of leader, perhaps someone younger, more analytical, and more attuned to the modern complexities of global business and international law. However, knowing the man we have watched for decades, surrender is simply not in his vocabulary. He has never been one to quietly hand over the keys to the kingdom he built with his own blood, sweat, and tears, no matter how insurmountable the odds appear. If Hudson truly attempts to dismantle his legacy, we are going to witness the most desperate, explosive, and monumental battle in the history of the show. It will be the ultimate clash of ideologies. The old school honor, loyalty, and brutality of the streets versus the cold, calculated, and sanitized ruthlessness of the modern corporate world. This will not just be a fight for territory or money. It will be a deeply personal fight for survival and the right to define what power truly means in this town. And if he loses, that is the lingering, terrifying question that makes this upcoming storyline so incredibly compelling to me. If this new corporate syndicate successfully executes its hostile takeover, it could truly mark the absolute end of an era. The empire that has defined the town for generations could be completely erased, replaced by a sleek, untouchable corporate machine that answers to no one. We are standing on the precipice of a massive, irreversible shift. The current peace is nothing but a fragile illusion, the quiet, terrifying intake of breath before a devastating scream. The board is set, the traditional pieces have been cleared away, and a new king is about to make his opening move. The only question is whether the old guard can learn the new rules fast enough to survive, or if they will be swept away into the history books forever.
Goodbye. Please like, subscribe, and comment on the GH Spoilers Daily channel.